People who play video games are a diverse bunch these days, spread across a huge variety of platforms, demographics, and genres. But let me tell you that there is one thing that unites all gamers, and debatably, all human beings. You lot absolutely love to complain. Don't get me wrong, a lot of this complaining is justified. You people complain about Nintendo shutting down really cool fan projects, you complain about companies putting out unfinished games all the time, and you rightfully complain about Blizzard somehow managing to outgreed anime stuff in the pay-to-win department. But there's one thing that the gaming public loves to whine about that's a little bit more complicated than you might have imagined, and that's the idea of something being overpowered. Whether it's a particular faction in a strategy game, a character in a hero shooter, or a card in a card game, you can't go 5 minutes without someone, somewhere, complaining that it's overpowered. And let me tell you, I'm sick of it. Not just because this conversation is seemingly impossible to escape, but because I think overpowered as a word has kind of an unfair stigma. Yes, a single strategy in a game being too powerful, resulting in you not being able to play the way you want, totally sucks. But in obsessing over perfect balance, ensuring that nothing is overpowered and that everyone's on equal footing, I think we often accidentally make games less fun and blind ourselves to the idea that a little bit of imbalance can actually be a good thing. I'd argue that not only is something being over or underpowered not always a negative, but that a bunch of great games, and in fact entire genres, actually hinge on having mechanics, strategies, and characters that are deliberately imbalanced. Now, that might sound like a crazy thing to say. For what possible reason could developers want certain strategies or approaches to be objectively more powerful than the alternatives? Well, first and foremost, let's be honest with ourselves. Being overpowered feels awesome. There's a certain sick pleasure in absolutely grinding someone into the dirt, and while multiplayer games can't completely lean into this thrill, single-player titles can really make the most of just how awesome being totally overpowered feels. Including transparently overpowered options can be a shortcut towards creating some great moments of triumph and catharsis, as well as giving players a way to experience the game's core fantasy right away without needing to master the mechanics first. Speaking of fantasies, look at Final Fantasy's Limit Break mechanic, a beloved hallmark of the series, despite it being an incredibly shallow and basically overpowered move no matter which game it's in. The way limit breaks work is that as you take damage, you charge up a character's limit break bar, and when it's full, you get to unleash a big, flashy mega attack. That is basically it. There's really not that much in the way of strategy to the limit break, and there's almost no reason to do anything else if your limit break is available. The original implementation in the original Final Fantasy VII even overwrites your attack when it's charged up, all but forcing you to limit break right away. But strategy isn't really the point here. Limit breaks exist as a way for you to perform epic comebacks when you're on the brink, or to finish off tough enemies in a stylish way, using a character's badass signature move, which is fun in of itself. Similarly, in normally pretty tricky brawlers like Bayonetta or Jetstream Sam's Handsomeness Adventure, moments where the game flips the script and lets you just totally go to town on an enemy can be a great way to reward good play, or just to take the edge off for a bit. Bayonetta's insta-killing torture attacks are pretty straightforward on a tactical level, but damn are they fun to pull off. And Blade Time in particular in Metal Gear Rising more often than not just lets you go wild slashing something up, which is both an extremely powerful technique and also feels cool as fuck every single time. Compare Platinum's stable to the Devil May Cry games, which are just as empowering when you're playing well and comboing through legions of baddies, but lack those easy overpowered hooks into the core fantasy for newer players, leading to the DMC games being much harder to get into, even if they're about the same difficulty-wise. Leveraging the fun of being overpowered is a little bit harder to do in competitive games, for obvious half the people not having fun reasons, but it's not impossible. In Team Fortress 2 and Titanfall 2, your reward for victory isn't just a pretty you win sign, but instead you get to hunt down and butcher your enemies from a position of massive advantage, or they'll try and run away. These little end of round moments don't take long, maybe less than a minute, so it's not a huge inconvenience to the losing team, but they do create some much needed catharsis at the end of a tough match, setting you up to start all over again. Similarly, in co-op games like Divinity Original Sin 2, the game lets you smash any semblance of fair play apart by working together with your teammates to teleport enemies into death fog, set up elaborate traps to rob people blind, or do really impressive combo moves that completely bypass fights. Of course, the fact that most of the really cool and most OP stuff in Divinity requires multiple players isn't a coincidence. Being overpowered feels awesome. Yes, but because of this, games can actually trick you into playing in a particular way. In basically all the best co-op games, players are dramatically more effective when synergizing their abilities than when working independently, and this is because players like feeling useful, and they like winning even more. So we're naturally pushed into playing co-op games with synergy in mind, not just because it's the most powerful strategy, but because the designers intended this to be the case. When you get right down to it, All games will invariably have a most powerful strategy, and when it comes to titles people take seriously, the player base will work out what that is sooner or later. So it makes sense for designers to preemptively balance their games in such a way that the best tactics lead players into playing in a way that's the most fun. In Doom, glory kills, insta-killing enemies and restoring precious health pushes you to play much more aggressively. In Fire Emblem, story-centric Lord characters are much more powerful than everyone else, so you'll become attached to them very quickly. And in logistics games like Satisfactory, automation is much faster than crafting things by hand. We don't consider these things to be overpowered, even though they totally are, because their purpose is to encourage us to play the game in a more fun way. Tempting players into engaging with the game in a particular way through the use of imbalanced systems can be a potent way of controlling their actions, but it can also backfire. Many card games have made the mistake of introducing new archetypes that lie above the existing power curve so as to encourage players to have fun using them. However, in the case of Hearthstone's Demon Hunter, or like 20 different things in Magic the Gathering's history, these overpowered new elements didn't enrich the strategic landscape but completely overshadow everything else. No one single part of the Demon Hunter's core tempo deck, or Magic the Gathering's infamous affinity keyword, was the culprit in making them overpowered. The strategies as a whole were simply way more powerful than everything else, meaning everyone either had to play those exact decks or a tailor-made counter deck if they wanted to stand a hope of competing. As you might imagine, this was kind of the opposite to the intended goal of encouraging people to experiment with new things. To avoid this problem, many games push not overarching strategies, which often leads to the overpowered strategy becoming overly centralizing, but individual mechanics or components of a bigger playstyle, allowing players to use them as a jumping off point for a whole variety of different approaches to victory. Look at Halo. Absolutely no one is going to argue that going up against a rocket launcher or an energy sword when you've only got a crappy plasma pistol is a fair fight. It just isn't. Power weapons in Halo are categorically and deliberately OP, allowing for one-hit kills and sometimes for individuals to go toe-to-toe with vehicles on foot. However, while these weapons might be imbalanced in an individual skirmish, the fact that they spawn in fixed locations and at predictable intervals adds an interesting side goal to the game that both teams have equal access to. Grabbing a power weapon won't instantly win you the game, but it might turn the tide in a stalemate or allow you to break through a fortified defense. This means that by their very existence, power weapons shift the impetus of the game away from beelining straight to the objective and more towards map control and coordinated pushes to either make the most of a big rocket launcher or to take out the wielder before they can do too much damage. The same goes for battle royale games like Apex Legends. Certain guns, like the infamous one-hit kill machine Kraber Sniper, which is fairly uncontested as the most powerful weapon in the game, can only be found in drop pods, which means that teams are going to need to come out into the open and risk getting into fights if they want the best loot. Playing safe and not going for drop pods is still a perfectly valid strategy, but for players who can't live without rare weapons, they're going to have to do the thing that makes the game the most fun. I think the best example of this approach in action, however, is a little video game called Dota, which owes basically its entire success to the fact that each and every one of its 100-odd heroes could be legitimately described as overpowered. The way Dota's heroes work, unlike the heroes in other more popular, more accessible games with better animes, is that basically every hero is oriented around one or two key mechanics that make them completely imbalanced in a way that gives them a totally unique playstyle. On the simple end of the scale, Sniper has a passive ability that allows him to hit heroes from more than a screen away and to safely besiege towers, and Legion Commander has an infinitely scaling attack buff that goes up whenever she duels someone to death. At the more complicated end, you've got heroes like Tinker, who can refresh all of his cooldowns at will to teleport around the map and spam out abilities faster than any other hero, and Meepo, who starts off weak, but by the end of the game turns into up to 5 totally separate heroes all running around and acting independently. Which is exactly as overwhelming and impossible to control as you think it is. You might think that each Dota hero having such singular focus on an overpowered identity would create massive balance problems and impossible to manage gameplay interactions. And, don't get me wrong, it sometimes does. But when Dota's balancing philosophy works as intended, all those different overpowered heroes can hold each other in a weird sort of equilibrium where the unique strengths can interact in really cool ways that other games simply can't offer. Take Viper and Medusa for example, two reptilian heroes who both live in the middle lane. Viper is arguably the strongest hero in the game during the first 10 minutes, and will easily butcher just about anyone during this time. Whereas Medusa is basically defenseless until the late game, where she can abuse her insane ability to multi-shot the entire enemy team, creating this weird sort of cat and mouse game where Medusa has to get EXP and money for items somehow, but without getting owned by Viper until she's confident that she can turn the tables later on. Or what about Huskar, who attacks and regenerates faster the closer he is to death like a crazy berserker. He's super hard to take down because trying to kill him just makes him hit you harder. unless you happen to be Axe, whose special overpowered ability is to instantly kill any enemy below a certain threshold, but only in melee range. This means that Axe has to charge in and try to chop Huskar's head off when he's at his most dangerous, while this flaming spear-throwing arsehole has to play safer than usual or risk entering the decapitation danger zone. Even more supporty heroes get a bunch of overpowered tools that drastically reshape the game, even though they're not the ones getting the kills. Crystal Maiden passively restores the mana of her entire team, meaning that they can spam out spells all game without needing to worry about potions. Earthshaker can create massive walls out of nothing, allowing his team to set up cool ambushes, and Dazzle can cast a shield that renders whoever it's on literally unable to die until it God damn it, Axe. I could talk about Dota all day, but the point is that imbalances on the micro scale can actually even out not just into a fair game, but a much more interesting one too, on the macro scale. But what if we took things a step further? What if instead of giving players a bunch of overpowered ways to pursue the same objective, we made imbalance a core part of the experience and had some players or a team of players who are literally more powerful than the others? Well, that brings us to the realm of asymmetric games. Now, just a point of clarification here, basically every game involving more than one player is asymmetric to a degree, from subtle stuff like chess being defined by the fact that white moves first, to different races in an RTS. But in the vast majority of cases, all the players are using the same fundamental mechanics, just in different ways. When I say asymmetrically designed games, however, I mean that different players are literally playing by different rules, and I think the key to making this very finicky genre work is knowing how to leverage overpoweredness to a game's advantage. Look at hidden role games like TTT, The Resistance, Secret Hitler, or Sussy Back Among Us. The bad guys have substantially more ability to affect the game than the innocents, both in the sense that they can kill people and maybe have other powers, but also the fact that they have way more information than everyone else. The fact that the traitor team are overpowered is why these sorts of games work at all. The only way the good guys can really win is when the more powerful players either make a mistake or get caught in a lie. The trick is being able to agree on when exactly that happened. This inherent difference in control over the game belies the fundamental problem with asymmetrically designed games. If one team or one player is objectively more powerful than everyone else, it's very possible to end up in a situation where some people feel like they have no agency because they never get to be powerful. The Gary's Mod custom game Murder, which sees a disguised knife-wielding murderer going up against an also disguised gun-wielding detective amidst a bunch of civilians, has this in spades. The problem here is that while the murderer and detective get to play a fun game of Sherlock and Moriarty, everyone else just sort of has to wait around to die and be used as evidence, which isn't very much fun. The tragically doomed Evolve is also a pretty interesting case of exactly this happening. So the way Evolve works is that there's a team of 4 hunters up against just one monster. Last team standing wins. Pretty straightforward so far. The interesting wrinkle in this setup is that the monster can, well, evolve, going from a tiny little stage 1 baby to a big stage 3 badass by eating other animals and growing stronger. At the start of the game, the hunters have a clear advantage. Once the monster reaches stage 2, it's more or less a fair fight, and if the monster is allowed to get to stage 3, he'll take the upper hand. This seems like a really interesting setup, as it allows both teams to feel overpowered, the hunters at the start chasing down the monster, and the scaling beastie by the end turning the tables. However, this setup fails to take into account player psychology. People want to feel overpowered and have fun being a badass, but equally, this means they'll seek out that feeling at all costs. So, what ended up happening was that the monster had neither a tactical nor emotional motivation to ever even try fighting the hunters until it was max level, at which point the dynamic reversed and the humans gave up because they'd lost any chance at an equal fight. Gameplay in Evolve mostly revolved around the monster doing nothing but running away until the point that they were either caught and lost because they weren't at max power and didn't want to fight, or evaded the hunters for 15 minutes and basically won the game, with neither team really seeing much of each other at any point. In an attempt to make everyone feel powerful, Turtle Rock, the developers, accidentally just made everyone feel bored. One way around this problem of overpowered players having too much control is to instead give the weaker players ultimate responsibility for the pace of the game. In Spy Party, a secret spy is pitted against a nearly omniscient sniper who has to spot the spy and then execute them. The sniper has all the power in this relationship. It's not like the spy can shoot back or anything, all they can do is rearrange statues. However, the spy is the one who decides when and where to act, trying to complete all their objectives before the sniper catches on. In this way, a legitimate strategy for the spy is to just do nothing suspicious at all and make the sniper paranoid that they've missed something, leading to them then making a mistake. Crawl is another fun example of this. 4 players are attempting to control the same human host, and the winner is whoever is human at the end of the game when the final boss falls, with whoever slays the current human taking their place. However, the only way to get gold to buff up your human and to make your human killing minions more powerful is to be a ghost. This creates a really interesting dynamic where the technically more powerful human is compelled to rush through to face the final boss because they know the longer they stick around, the more tenuous their grip on mortality becomes. Of course, the undisputed king of this approach is Left 4 Dead Versus, ironically made by some of these same people as Evolve. The survivors in Left 4 Dead are markedly more powerful than the infected, because they, have guns and can heal and can throw pipe bombs and stuff. It's no contest. The only advantage the infected have on their side is that they can respawn and the humans can't, meaning that the infected often have to work together not to kill the humans outright, but to disrupt, separate, and whittle them down over time, eventually leading to the survivors getting picked off one by one. Left 4 Dead Versus is so tense because every second the survivors waste dealing with a lone jockey or running back to save a teammate who got smoked is more of their resources wasted and more time for the infected to respawn and regroup for another attack, putting them under more and more pressure until the survivors finally crumble and are forced to make a mad dash for the exit as the zombies gleefully go to town. Or simply charge the survivors off a goddamn building, which, seriously, that's the most overpowered thing in the whole goddamn game. Some suspect level design in an otherwise great game aside, hopefully now you see why I think the word overpowered has gotten a bit of a bad rap. Sometimes a bit of imbalance is just what a game needs to unlock its full potential. What seems like an over-centralizing strategy can actually be encouraging us to play in a fun way. What feel like boring, overpowered moves can actually be a great excuse for a fun time. And what you think are unbeatable enemies might just need for you to figure out your own OP solution. On a broader level, our fear of things not being perfectly balanced at all times often just ends up with games being sanded down into mediocrity. MMORPGs in particular often run into this issue. In an attempt to make all classes balanced, many developers often end up stripping away unique overpowered tools that make each one so fun to play and either divide them among all the classes or simply remove these tools outright. Shamans in World of Warcraft are the biggest example I can think of, where once they had a litany of cool totems and arguably the best raid buff in the game in the form of Bloodlust, or Heroism if you're a boring Alliance player, now a lot of these things have been taken away because they were difficult to balance, ending up with totems being neutered and both mages and hunters getting access to a reskinned Bloodlust, removing a lot of the individual appeal and utility of playing a shaman in service of an abstract notion of balance that didn't really make the game more fun for anyone. Not only that, a relentless fixation on balance can actually force some players out of enjoying a game. If the Call of Duty developers removed the glorious noob tube, many less skilled players would lack a way to feel like they're able to compete, and would probably get bored long before they'd learn that the tube isn't that powerful anyway. And imagine if fighting games like Street Fighter didn't have deliberately terrible joke characters like Dan. There is no moment more hype than beating an opponent with a character designed to suck, and if Dan were, good, then those experiences would be lost forever. Oh wait, that's exactly what happened, and it sucked. Now he's just regular bad instead of fun bad. We tend to think of video game balance as a goal, a platonic ideal to shoot towards at all times. But it just isn't. Like many things, video game balance is just a tool, one that can be used in a variety of ways for a variety of different aims, from encouraging different playstyles to changing the strategic landscape of a game. So I think it's worth relaxing a little bit and accepting a few overpowered things, because who knows, they might actually improve the experience if you give them a chance. And for those who disagree, might I introduce you to my favourite totally balanced game? It's very deep, people have actually been playing it for centuries, there's some very sophisticated commentary on capitalism and royalty, and it's just flipping a coin. That's the joke, I'm just making fun of people now. Hi, hello, and welcome to this thing I do after each and every video. Why did I start doing it? I've completely forgotten, to be honest. Why do I continue to do it? Well, that's so I can make some excuses about why this video was late. It's been very warm over here lately, and also I was helping out run the GMTK Game Jam. But mostly, it's so I can give some very deserving people some excellent shoutouts. First up, I'd like to celebrate a YouTuber who is absolutely fantastic and you really should have already subscribed to, and that is Classics of Game. Classics of Game is... it's difficult to pin down really, but it's a channel all about posting out of context clips from very weird video games. Sometimes they're terrible, sometimes they're obscure, and sometimes they're just from Japan, and sometimes it's all three. Genuinely, the channel is constantly surprising and hilarious. I'm very glad it came back from hiatus, because it's been on my recommendation list for literally years. Please go check it out. Of course, the other people I need to shout out are my ever wonderful, ever patient patrons, who choose to support the channel each and every month, freeing me from the possibility of indentured servitude in the NordVPN mines. Blech. In exchange for kicking a few bucks my way every month, My patrons get early access to videos, behind the scenes gubbins, and even some extra game analysis that I couldn't fit into this video. Also, if you give me money on Patreon, consider yourself absolved for ad blocking my videos, because as far as I'm concerned, you've already paid for yourself. The most generous patrons of all, however, they get a personal shout out in the credits from yours truly. And those people are Alge, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Alno94, Bjorn Carla, Brennan Spalding, Brian Latariani, Constantine Amend, Corey Gerard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Diggy Dog, Digletier, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkal, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Janos Fakete, Jory Breno, Jordan Gear, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, Knox, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Peter D. Tomasak, Philby the Bilby, Phoenix Thurikaz, Rajigar, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tin Markovic, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and Ciao. Okay, thank you for watching, stay cool out there, it is very hot right now, and I will see you around. Bye!